is primarily a researcher, and what I've done with each of my books is, yeah, there's a bit of the personal story in there, but mainly looking at what we know about the drug alcohol, what we know about the disease of addiction, and analysis of the different studies that are available today to put together some of the most current thoughts or current thinking in the world of addiction. So what I've done with my latest book is, presently in the United States, you may have heard that we have opioid crisis, and that's not unlike the benzodiazepine crisis that is presently gripping Great Britain. Look out, opioids are on their way. You guys definitely have a different prescriber network in the UK than we do in the United States. But by all news accounts, the opioid crisis for Great Britain is a growing concern, and that more and more people are looking at not only the prescription opioids, but also heroin and fentanyl analogs, which are creeping into they've already crept into the heroin supply, and that's a large reason for the fatalities that we're seeing today. But in the United States, we presently are in the grips of an opioid crisis. And part of that is machination of the political system, and it's also part due to the news industry, because by all accounts we have about 40 crises going on today.
Enough. When do we look at images like the ones we witnessed this week and say, enough already?
Hi, I'm Joan London. Diabetes is a growing epidemic in the United States.
There seems to be an epidemic in the United States of tonsil cancer.
In Rentham, Massachusetts, Assistant Vice Principal Spencer Christie says he too is overwhelmed by this new and pervasive epidemic.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you go see Someone You Love, the HPV Epidemic.
The infection itself with the virus really doesn't cause symptoms.
Well, good evening to you, Josh. Yeah, I spoke with medical experts, and they tell me that suicide is well on its way to becoming an epidemic.
This drug has become a nationwide epidemic. Just last year, New York City banned the sale of K2.
We've got a student loan epidemic. It's a big deal.
Well, instead of saying starting school later, why don't you say to kids, hey, go to bed earlier?
Do you know, Gail, this is a real problem. I mean, it's a serious epidemic amongst our kids.
Look, we all know snorers in this world, but how does it actually affect us?
That almost half of adult women report a low to non-existent sexual satisfaction. One of the nation's leading publications called it the silent epidemic.
The obesity epidemic in the United States is unfortunately continuing to grow.
Doctors are saying there's a new epidemic in fertility, a twin epidemic.
It's a deadly epidemic that's getting worse. Those are the harsh words from the head of Hamilton County's Women Helping Women about domestic violence homicides.
It's actually a major epidemic in this country.
The flu, which is now considered an epidemic every state.
One of the flu epidemic's latest victims.
Autism has become an epidemic.
So in the United States, by my count in the last 2 weeks when I assembled all these news clips, is we have about 40 epidemics going on in the United States right now. Again, part of the factor here is the news industry, that the news industry tends to sensationalize everything and a crisis becomes an epidemic because it is a business, and the more viewers they get, the more advertising they can charge. So when we look at true epidemics, yes, I don't want to diminish this 42,000, yeah, that's a serious problem. And most of those people are young people in the early parts of their lives, losing their lives to opioids. And every single one of them is a tragedy. I won't diminish that at all. But as far as epidemics go, this is what an epidemic looks like in 1918. The Spanish flu killed more than 100 million people in a single year. 42,249 deaths in a single year is still very tragic, and it is a very big crisis, but it's not even our biggest drug crisis. In the United States, alcohol kills 90,000 Americans every year. That's bigger than a football stadium, American football, probably soccer as well. And it's the number 3 cause of preventable death worldwide. And for that reason, I believe this number, this 90,000 number, is well understated because of alcohol's connection as a carcinogen, as a toxin that is linked to more than 60 different diseases, aside from the disease of alcoholism. So this toxin and carcinogen is also a gateway drug, and that is primarily the purpose of my presentation today, is to talk about alcohol's role in the epidemic, the crisis that we have presently in the United States. And this applies to even the crisis that we're looking at here in Great Britain, the crisis of benzodiazepine use. For political reasons, we also might not talk about alcohol.
I don't care that it costs the economy $250 billion a year, kills 89,000 a year, or chokes up to 20 to 40% of the hospital resources. We can't fight alcohol. There are jobs, American jobs at stake, sales taxes on the line. Forget this. A pandemic of America's most beloved drug, it's unsellable. Johnson didn't seek re-election after he declared alcohol to be public health enemy number one. He couldn't sell it. Give me an epidemic, a drug epidemic, but a smaller one, and one we can hate and sell and win without sacrificing jobs or taxes. Make it scary but sympathetic. It's got to be real, a real epidemic, but alcohol is untouchable.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
So there are political motivations as well why we don't talk about the crisis involving alcohol. We focus our attention on the crisis that is claiming a lot of lives, and one at which we can point a lot of fingers. There's a lot of scapegoating going on today with the crisis involving opioids. First of all, people are pointing to the medical profession. They're the ones who prescribe oxycodone, hydrocodone, etc., to pain patients, legitimate pain patients. And there's been a lot of accusation in the medical community, or of the medical community, that they're overprescribing and that there are pill shoppers out there who are finding the doctor who's going to write the script to give them their fix and continually to supply them. However, when you look at the medical profession a lot closer and the way they prescribe, if these prescriptions, or I should say when these prescriptions are followed as directed by the physician, the overdose rate is very, very low, under 1% for people who are prescribed opiates for surgical reasons. And the number 2 prescriber of opiates is oral surgeons, dentists, and little over 1% of those patients who follow the prescription as written by the doctor end up as an overdose. Furthermore, when you look at the medical profession, I want to point out that they're not entirely in the clear here. Their hands aren't clean. They may not be the cause of an opioid crisis, but when you look at 2/3 of the prescriptions written for pain are going to cancer patients, and another 6% are going for non-cancer reasons, pain reasons, that leaves about 1/3 that are being written for toothaches. There's not an objective measure that you can go in and say, well, we took this ounce of blood out of you and okay, you're definitely a pain sufferer. It's not that easy. So they're not off the hook, but their prescription writing for pain purposes leaves a little bit of room to be desired. And again, to their defense, not that they need defending, but they are given very, very little training on the disease of addiction, for one, and also on the addictive nature of some of these opioids, which comes into play a little later on when we talk about the pharmaceutical company's role in this. Another reason that's given for the increase in opiate deaths and opiate overdoses is economic demise. And the economic demise theory goes pretty parallel with a lot of increases in use of substance, because when the economy stinks, we drink or we take drugs. You don't take drugs to feel good. You take drugs to feel less bad. And in the case of an economic demise, for example, in 2007, the U.S. economy tanked. It was in bad shape. The housing market was abysmal due to a lot of mortgage underwriting. Long theory here. I used to work in the financial services industry, so I could give you another 2 hours on that, but I'm not going to. Economic demise theory works, except, yeah, there was a spike in 2007 and 2008 in the use of opiates. Number of prescriptions up, number of heroin deaths are up. Then, fast forward the tape until 2010, 2011, 2012, the economy started improving. So this is where we blow up the economic demise theory. the economy was improving, and in 2012, opioid deaths were higher than ever, higher than the level of 2007 and 2008, and continued to rise through 2015 and 2016. They seem to have leveled off a little bit due to some regulation, and I'll get into parts of the Aberrato responses to this crisis in a little bit. But the economic demise theory works at the beginning, but it doesn't hold a lot of water right now as to why the opiate crisis is still at the level that it is at today. Pharmaceutical companies, boy, are they in the crosshairs. Purdue Pharma is the maker of OxyContin, and largely to blame, or largely blamed, for the present opiate crisis that is going on in the United States. And what is the pharmaceutical company doing? They are doing exactly what we asked them to do, and create something that takes away legitimate chronic pain when followed as prescribed. So there is a lot of blame. There are a lot of Aberrato responses to this crisis that's going on today. And by Aberrato, that's what I mean. We're going to get into the Latin portion of the program here. Aberrato just means that it's we say, we sue, we look for the deep pockets, and we go for blood. And the pharmaceutical companies, no question about it, they're among the most profitable companies in the United States. So they are being sued for their marketing of this product, of oxycodone in particular, and I'm not going to defend them. By all measures, their marketing was pretty sketchy regarding this drug. They claimed it was had a low risk of addiction, which any opiate automatically from tramadol right up the scale has a high degree or a high level of addictive quality. Along with this lawsuit binge that we're on, yeah, we're increasing prosecutions of doctors who were acting as pill mills, writing a prescription for Juan Carlos here. We'll just write you a prescription. You got $200? You got a prescription. We'll take care of you. Those kind of unscrupulous doctors, yeah, they're being hauled into court. They're being sued. They're being prosecuted, and that's the way it should be. I mean, that's unethical and illegal. Also, the drug dealers, yeah, we're hauling them in, and we're prosecuting them as well, as we should. But the rest of the legislation is aimed at a number of different areas of ways to regulate or ways to control the spread of this opioid crisis that they're presently engaged in. Some of this legislation is aimed at prescriber regulation, giving doctors guidelines on how many of these pills that they can prescribe, giving network pharmacists a database to know if a patient comes in before them, that they know that he hasn't been shopping pills from Dr. X, Dr. Y, and Dr. Z, or having them filled at pharmacy A, B, and C all simultaneously. So in part of that regulation with the pharmacies and with the prescriptions themselves is we've jeopardized the ability for legitimate chronic pain patients to get the kind of relief that they need, because the doctor's hands are very much in the handcuffs as to how much or how often they can prescribe a medication for a cancer patient, for example. So there's two edges to that part of the legislation that's going on. All in, since 2006, there have been over 100 bills introduced to the U.S. Congress. About 50 of them have passed. Everything from the 21st Century CARES Act, which fully funds a lot of treatment. And treatment, by the way, is a good solution, is a good Aberrato response to a lot of people taking drugs, regardless of the class of drugs. We want to increase access to treatment. That's what our profession believes in, and that's what our culture believes in. Western culture absolutely engages in the idea of getting a sick person well, and that's what treatment is about. 21st Century CARES Act increases the money available through the government for treatment purposes. One of the things that has been an outgrowth of this is Narcan. And Narcan is a drug that brings back the dead. And that's pretty remarkable. If somebody overdoses on an opiate, they are given an injection or a nasal spray containing Narcan, and that counteracts the effect. It's an opioid agonist, and it counteracts the effect of the overdose, stopping their heart, stopping their respiratory system, and gives them a second chance. And I was of mixed opinion on Narcan First of all, I think it is terrible public health policy to subsidize recklessness. And we addicts are not known for naltrexone. Yeah, and terrible health policy, public health policy to subsidize recklessness. And addicts like myself are known for, well, not exactly the best decision making. But my opinion on Narcan has changed dramatically, because if you've ever held a dead person in your arms, and I have, you know that you'll go to any length to bring them back to life. And in the case of an opioid overdose, you cannot bring a corpse into treatment. You can bring a person who's been given a second chance into treatment. So that is why I really support the idea of first responders, police, ambulance, to carry this and to make it publicly available as well. One of the challenges, though, and we as addicts are thrill seekers, and there's been a growing part of the opioid user population that has been challenging death by using this drug that brings them back to life. It reminded me of a movie that was very popular in the 1990s, a little on the schlocky side, but it was called Flatliners, people who challenged death for a minute or two at a time to see if they could get away with it.
Today's a good day to die.
Flatline.
30 seconds to go.
Can you recall any specific emotion or sensation?
No, but there's something out there.
We're running out of time.
300, clear! Nothing. Your heart go again, clear! Nothing, I can't hear anything. Come on, Nelson, breathe. We lost him! No!
Welcome back, man.
I'm going next.
2 minutes.
2:10.
Was there anything negative about your experience?
This is too weird. We've experienced death.
Now somehow we brought our sins back physically.
That is not hallucination, and it is not possible.
Oh my God.
You withheld information. That's the same as lying.
You wouldn't have done it.
At least we would have had a choice. You're not real.
Hey, come on, they're your sins. Live with them. I do.
No! Nelson, please!
I thought I paid my dues.
Thank you for the nightmare.
No! Come on, Joe.
Starting CPR. 1 1,000, 2 1,000.
Flatliners. Some lines shouldn't be crossed.
Yeah, it's dramatic, and there's a fair amount of moralization going on there. But the fact remains that there is a group of people out there who are trying Narcan or using Narcan for this reason. It's a growing number of people. It's a concern, of course, but for that reason alone, that's not a reason to dismiss the power of Narcan and giving people a second chance. Are they getting a second chance is the question. And that's where the legislation increasing the amount of treatment dollars is falling short, because only 1 in 3 people who are administered Narcan are taken directly to a treatment facility where they can have their addiction addressed. The other 2 or 3, other 2 of the 3 are left to their own devices. And again, as I said, those under the influence of the disease of addiction aren't known for the best kind of thinking. Treatment is a great alternative. Of course, some people will recommend pot, recreational pot. Man, if we legalize this stuff, we wouldn't have this opioid crisis. Can I interest you in a little pot? See what I did there? That's good stuff. There is a crew of very vocal, very active people in the U.S. Political system that will argue vehemently for the legalization of recreational use of marijuana. And that reminds me of the Greeks, who built this tremendous Trojan horse to roll up to the gates of Troy to say, here, we've got a great gift for you. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to improve another gateway drug if you're already battling a drug crisis today. Making an illicit drug licit again isn't going to solve any problems that it won't also help create. So with that metaphor in mind, this concludes our Latin lesson for the day. Timeo Danaos et dona ferentes, fear Greeks, even if they bring gifts. This is a Trojan horse in the making. So these are the aberrational responses to the opioid crisis that's gripping America today. Again, a lot of fear and a lot of anger, and a lot of it is looking at cleaning up with the cat dragged in. Every single one of those. This is cleaning up after a person's overdose, cleaning up after a medical profession, cleaning up after a pharmaceutical business that has possibly violated a lot of ethics. But what about what dragged the cat in? What caused this crisis? And yeah, what I'm talking about is the substance. I'm not talking about the reason that people take drugs. People take drugs not to feel good, but to feel less bad. And I'm sure, Patrick, you've got some great stuff in your poster presentation as well as to the reason people are involved in substance use and substance abuse. And as you mentioned earlier, trauma is a big part of that. But what I'm looking at is what brought this crisis on truly. How many of these opioid deaths are alcohol related? Reason that I get to alcohol being behind every one of these drug deaths is that alcohol is the drug that we approve. It's the one we ignore. This is the root of the crisis here. What we ignore, we permit. And what we permit, we condone. In the case of alcohol, 66% of illicit drug users point to alcohol being their first drug of use. So we just knocked off 2/3 of the people who are overdosing on alcohol or on opioids. We learned our drug use. America is a drug country. So is Great Britain. Most of the Western world is drug-oriented. It's a culture of, hey, this feels good. I want more of it. We were groomed to use drugs. $250 billion in annual economic costs in the United States alone, but still we glorify, we worship, we ignore, and permit this drug. And part of that, $250 billion, is $173 billion in lost productivity. America's supposed to be one of the most productive countries in the world, or at least one of the economic powerhouses. Well, imagine what that would do to the gross domestic product of the United States. When you look at $173 billion, that is the economy of Norway. It is larger than all but 48 of the largest economies in the world. All but 48. That's a lot of economic toll, a lot of economic damage. And we're using it more. We're not drinking less these days. In, what was it, 2002? 65% of adults drank. 8.5% had alcohol use disorders, including the disease of alcoholism. Fast forward 10 years, just 10 years, and the numbers have increased to 73% of the adults drinking and 12.7% of the population, the adult population over 18, even though you can't drink legally until you're 21. That percentage, 12.7%, having an alcohol use disorder, including the disease of alcoholism. What we have done with this drug in our culture is we've permitted, paid for, endorsed, and condoned drug use. We are grooming the next generation of drug users, whether they're licit drug users or illicit drug users. In my own country, Patrick, you can attest to this, this is something I found right in my own grocery store, just 15 feet away from the candy aisle. This is a pill that you can take. You take the blue one if you're going to head out drinking, because this will stave off your hangover that you're going to have the next day. Hey, we're not condoning this behavior, but just in case, take the blue pill. And the next morning, if you feel completely like garbage, take the red pill. That'll solve your hangover. Not as much as not drinking in the first place would solve it, but we have these alternatives, and they're in my grocery store, 15 feet away from the candy aisle. We condone the use of drugs. We are a culture of drug users. And how do we learn to self-medicate? Because of our relationship with alcohol. Hey, one didn't get me there, so I'm just going to prescribe myself a second dose. Bartender, another shot of Jack, please. I challenge you to find a beer commercial or a beer advertisement that doesn't show at least 2 doses of the drug. Alcohol is associated with good times. Come on, people, live it up. This is, by the way, just divorced. They're celebrating something. But look at the conviviality. Look at the joy in the faces. Look at the happiness that alcohol brings you. We are groomed to believe that this empty promise of happiness comes in 12 ounces or a pint. It's about relaxation. Kick back. Forget all your worries. We don't drink to feel good. We drink to feel less bad. And boy, there's a chick in a bikini and a nice sunset and ocean waves and a couple of beers, just a couple of relaxation episodes with your friends. That's how we sell and pitch alcohol. We say it is sexy. We say it is hip. And we say it's healthy, ignoring the fact that alcohol is linked to more than 60 diseases, including cancer. Stroke risk doubles the second you take a drink, whether you're an alcoholic or a moderate drinker. There was a study, the first time I was doing this presentation about a month ago over in Paris. The study just came out from the American Medical Association that said what I've kind of been saying for 10 years is there's not a single health benefit to drinking any amount of alcohol, even in moderation. Those old saws that you've heard about alcohol being good for your heart, that was discredited a decade ago. Alcohol is actually very bad for your heart, and it weakens your body's muscles, and your heart being the most important one. Alcohol also raids the body of B vitamins. B vitamins essential to healthy brain function and, yeah, your heart. So, far from being healthy, despite how healthy these people look. In fact, I'd probably wager that not one of them is a heavy drinker or even a moderate drinker. Speaking of moderation, boy, did we allow the alcohol industry to get away with a big one here. Drinking responsibly. Is there a responsible way to drink a toxin and no carcinogen? But Rafael Nadal says, hey, champions, we drink responsibly. So as long as you drink responsibly, you can use this drug. But remember, we always tell you to take more than 1 dose. And it might make you the smartest, most interesting man in the world.
He is the life of parties he has never attended. If he were to punch you in the face, you would have to fight off the strong urge to thank him. Sharks have a week dedicated to him. He is the most interesting man in the world.
I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis. Stay thirsty, my friends.
Most interesting man in the world. What we have with alcohol, I've got a child's toy here. It's called a fidget spinner. It's believed to have some treatment purpose in treatment of ADHD for children. Helps distract them a little bit. But I bring this along as a good example of what we're talking about here with crisis after crisis. In the United States, for example, in the 1860s, we had a crisis of morphine use. And that was because alcohol couldn't get people where they wanted to get. It used to be if you got hurt, you took a shot of whiskey and you bit the bullet and you're good. But Civil War in the United States, the North versus the South, the morphine use in the field was to quell the pain in very serious field-related injuries in war. So you couldn't get where you got with alcohol, so you started taking morphine. Jump ahead to the 1920s in the United States. Prohibition, which, by the way, I'm not in favor of. I think it's a stupid idea. I think education and information about this drug is critical, not banning it. But in the 1920s in the United States, we banned it. People couldn't get where they wanted to get with alcohol because it wasn't available. So again, morphine and heroin started coming to life in the United States. 1950s, another drug crisis revolving around alcohol. In the 1950s, women wanted to look great and they didn't want to hit the old man's booze cabinet, so they started taking diet pills. Diet pills, amphetamines were very popular in the 1950s, early 60s. You couldn't get where you wanted to get with alcohol, but how about a benzo? Something like Prozac, Mother's Little Helper, became very popular. As we fast forward again, this cycle spins around alcohol. In the 1970s, heroin. In the 1980s, crack cocaine. 1990s, methamphetamines, crystal meth. And here we are in an opioid crisis. When you look at all these crises combined, you look at how they revolve around a central hub, with this fidget spinner being a good example. All of them revolve around one central point, and that is the licit drug that we embrace, we permit, we condone the use of, and that licit drug at the hub of everything is alcohol. It's an interesting visual anyway. But as we look at the present crisis we're in today, how do we address this crisis from this perspective? Not just looking at mopping up what the cat dragged in, but taking care of what dragged the cat in. This will help alleviate the present crisis by drawing and changing the dialogue to move it from what alcohol does for you to what alcohol does to you, or what any drug use in general will do to you rather than what it does for you. But it also diminishes the effect later on of continual crisis after crisis after crisis. We're going to continue to find ourselves mired in crisis. In fact, we're in a shadow crisis right now behind the opioid crisis in the United States. It's benzos. Xanax is very popular here in the UK, in the United States. More people are taking benzodiazepines as a result of being on a medication-assisted treatment protocol. So they're giving an opioid agonist, something that's going to block the effects of opioids to lower their cravings for it, but they still want to get somewhere other than where they're at right now. So they're taking benzodiazepines, another drug of abuse in the United States. Also, as a result of medication-assisted treatment, and I'm in favor of it, I think it's a great idea as long as it's properly supervised. Again, it's up to the participant, really, isn't it? And that was kind of your point. You decide. And if somebody decides that they don't want to stick to this, well, I'm taking medication to prevent my getting a feeling from opiates, well, then they're taking now an increased number, again, methamphetamine in the United States. So this crisis has in turn created another shadow crisis. So we need to look at reducing the cycle of crisis in general. Looking at the gateway drug, alcohol, for 66%, it's the drug of first use, and for the other thirds, it's how we were groomed for drug use, primarily through alcohol advertising. Alcohol advertising has been under fire for about a decade in the United States. We're looking at public advertising on bus stops, anywhere where kids might see it. We're looking at regulating that. But the alcohol industry is a self-regulated business when it comes to advertising. Nothing like having your mother-in-law being the arbiter of your marital dispute. They have the right to say, nah, we don't approve of this ad, but they're the ones who choose their own advertising rather than some regulatory body. In alcohol advertising, here's where the challenge comes in. It comes in with kids. Age of first use in the United States of alcohol, 12. That's pretty severe when you consider the drinking ages until 21, and you can't even buy the stuff. But the RAND Corporation did a survey of 9-year-olds. These are 4th graders. And 1 in 3 of them had unaided recall of a beer brand, and 1 in 4 could name 3 or more brands of alcohol. The advertising is reaching the kids, the people, the next generation of drug users, long before we've even had an opportunity to have the dialogue with them that drugs are not without consequence. The Johns Hopkins University Center for Alcohol Marketing to the Youth did their survey at people under 20, under the age of buying alcohol. They're hearing 8 to 14% more alcohol ads than people over 21, the people who can really buy the stuff. And a lot of it is geared toward the next generation of drinking. These are called Alka-Pops. These are sweet-flavored malt beverages that are jacked up in alcohol content, anywhere from 6 to 12% alcohol. And any of these, they're coming in flashy cans and sweet flavors that a more mature drinker probably wouldn't have anything to do with. Back when I was a kid, this was wine coolers. And now today, we have alcohol pops. absolutely geared toward the next generation, grooming the next generation of drug users. So alcohol advertising is reaching the youngest and most vulnerable of our population today. Public drinking, on the other hand, reaches everybody that's around it. We have a lot of church festivals and street festivals in the United States, and that's not unlike any other country in the world. And when you're at a church festival or a street festival, you see somebody using a drug. You would lose your mind if they were using a different drug in a public arena. But when it comes to alcohol, we're all okay with it because this is the drug we permit and the drug we condone. Public drinking is therefore in the crosshairs as we look at reducing this cycle of crises. Alcohol pricing, the third point on the list here, third of these four, is probably the most studied and most implemented of any of these four strategies. In fact, Scotland nearby just in May of this year implemented a minimum alcohol pricing as a tool to reduce consumption. And the rest of the world is debating this, including here in the UK. It's been brought before Parliament and it's vigorously debated, just as it was in Scotland. It took Scotland 8 years between the time that legislation was passed until May of this year when it was finally implemented, because there is a lot of lobbying power with the alcohol industry. Alcohol pricing, the mechanisms look like this. Sunsetting, discounting, and special pricing. Hey, you get buy 2 30-packs, save 15% or 50%, whatever the pricing gimmick is to encourage people to buy more doses of the drug. Those are the things that are looked at as vehicles to reduce consumption. Special pricing and special promotions. Buy this 12-pack of Miller Lite and you get this nice baseball cap, or you get this pullover hoodie sweatshirt. Establishing the floor price for alcohol below which no alcohol can be sold is the most common pricing tool that's been engaged. That's the one in Scotland right now, where you have set a minimum price. And at first glance, you might say, well, the alcohol industry must really be against that. In actuality, their profitability doesn't change. And that'll bear out in the next year to 2 years as they look at the profitability of alcohol sales in Scotland, for example, and other countries that have done this. Their competition is level. Nobody can undercut their price. So they have the pricing mechanism imposed by the government. Also, taxation is another pricing tactic, which in the United States hasn't been looked at seriously since the 1950s. There was a tax increase on alcohol as recently as 1991, long before Justin Bieber was born. But we're taxing alcohol as a percentage of the price, not as a per unit vehicle. So if you're buying a pint of alcohol at $4 or $50, you're being taxed at that price rather than the amount of alcohol in there. So taxing it as that percentage of price does increase or does decrease the consumption of alcohol. These four tactics, these are really crucial if we're looking at what dragged the cat in. The use of alcohol as a gateway drug. Again, 2/3 of the licit and illicit drug users use this as their first drug of choice. And also we are groomed by our cultural acceptance of this drug to become the next generation of drug users. But by these four tactics, we can clean up what the cat dragged in, but also what dragged the cat in. We can save, just by pricing mechanisms alone, enough people in the United States to fill a basketball arena every single year. That's 20,000 people. More importantly, when we talk about trauma earlier, a 10% increase in the price of alcohol reduces number and severity of abused children by 132,000. That's the trauma they're drinking under. So if we're eliminating, by just raising the price of a pint by 50 cents, a pint of Smittix, increase the price by 50 cents, and you look at the overall toll in creating trauma among children with that level of abuse, that alone is a good reason to impose a pricing mechanism in the alcohol. In the year I was born, 1967, don't do the math, I'm 51. So, the year I was born, in 1967, 72% of the adult males in the United States smoked. Today, 72% of adult males don't smoke. And that's an astounding turnaround in 2 generations. Imagine, and you can see a lot of similarities in this 4-point proposal that I've given you, and I have in my book here, that there are a lot of similarities to the anti-smoking campaign. What happens most frequently in the United States is anti-smoking campaigns have trickled all the way down to the kindergarten level. So 6, 5-year-olds are learning that smoking's bad, yucky, it'll kill you. Now, smoking has the 6th highest cost per capita on healthcare in the United States. The number 2 highest cost is alcohol use. But 80% of our kindergartners are hearing that smoking's bad, number 6 on the list. But number 2 on the list, less than 10% are learning in that same age group. So as we increase education for the younger grades, we gain the ground on the gateway drug. Overall, though, what I've brought you are the 4 tactics that will look at what dragged the cat in rather than what the cat dragged in. Thank you.